the blood-soaked annals of Roman imperial history. Few stories capture the depths of human cruelty and desperation quite like that of Sporus, a beautiful young boy whose fate became intertwined with one of history's most notorious emperors. This is not merely a tale of political intrigue or military conquest, but a haunting examination of power's ability to strip away humanity itself, leaving behind only the grotesque theater of imperial whim. Sporus' story unfolds like a nightmare within the marble halls of ancient Rome, where the line between love and possession, between honor and degradation, dissolved entirely under the mad gaze of Nero. The year was 65 AD. The Roman Empire stretched from Britain to the Euphrates, its power seemingly limitless under the rule of Nero, Claudius, Caesar Augustus, Germanicus. Yet within the opulent walls of the Domus Aurea, Nero's golden palace, a darkness festered that would soon consume an innocent young life. The emperor, now in his late 20s, had already shocked Roman society with his theatrical performances, his architectural excesses, and his volatile relationships with those closest to him. Rome itself still bore the scars of the Great Fire of 64 AD, and whispers of the emperor's madness drifted through the streets like smoke from the still smoldering ruins. In this world of imperial excess and casual cruelty, young Sporus lived as a freedman in the imperial household. Though technically free, such a position offered little protection from the whims of absolute power. Historical accounts describe him as possessing an almost ethereal beauty, delicate features, and a graceful bearing that would prove to be both his distinction and his doom. The boy had caught the attention of the imperial court, not through any ambition of his own, but simply by existing in a world where beauty itself could become a currency of suffering. The catalyst for Sporus' tragic transformation came in the form of a woman's death. Poppaea, Sabina, Nero's second wife and the great love of his tumultuous life, had died under mysterious circumstances in 65 AD. Some ancient sources claim Nero himself killed her in a fit of rage, kicking her while she was pregnant. Others suggest she died from complications in childbirth. Whatever the truth, Poppaea's death left Nero devastated, consumed by a grief that would soon curdle into something far more sinister. The emperor's mourning took on an obsessive quality as he desperately sought ways to resurrect or replace the woman he claimed to love above all others. It was during this period of despair that fate delivered Sporus into Nero's sight. Whether by coincidence or design, the young freedman was noticed by the emperor, who was struck by what he perceived as a startling resemblance to his dead wife. Ancient historians like Cassius Dio and Suetonius recorded that Nero became fixated on this resemblance, seeing in Sporus' delicate features a chance to reclaim what death had stolen. The emperor conceived a plan so audacious and horrific that it would shock even the jaded sensibilities of imperial Rome. The decision, when it came, was swift and irreversible. Nero commanded that Sporus be castrated, permanently altering the young man's body to better serve the emperor's twisted vision. This was not merely physical mutilation, but a complete erasure of Sporus' identity as a man, transforming him into something that existed solely for Nero's psychological comfort. The castration was performed by imperial physicians, likely in the sterile luxury of the palace's medical quarters, where screams could be muffled by marble walls and the boy's protests dismissed as the insignificant cries of property. Following the mutilation, Nero's plan revealed its full horror. The emperor announced his intention to marry Sporus in a public ceremony, treating the traumatized young man as a replacement for his beloved Poppaea. This was not marriage as Romans understood it, but a grotesque parody that violated every social, religious, and legal custom of the empire. Sporus was given a new name, Sabina, after the dead empress, and was dressed in the finest women's clothing, adorned with jewelry that had once belonged to Poppaea herself. The emperor's household was commanded to treat Sporus as the empress, addressing him with feminine titles and observing all the protocols due to an imperial wife. The wedding ceremony itself was a spectacle of imperial madness, played out before the horrified eyes of Roman society. Sporus, barely recognizable in his elaborate feminine attire, was led through the rituals of Roman marriage, while the emperor played the role of devoted bridegroom. Ancient sources described the ceremony as both magnificent and deeply disturbing, with all the pomp and circumstance of a legitimate imperial wedding masking the fundamental horror of what was actually taking place. Guests were forced to participate in the charade, offering congratulations and wedding gifts, while privately recoiling from the emperor's grotesque theater. The aftermath of this bizarre union saw Sporus paraded through Rome as Nero's empress, forced to appear at public events and ceremonies in his feminine guise. Completely dependent on the emperor's favor, he had no choice but to play his assigned role. He was required to accompany Nero to the theater, to official functions, and even to private dinners, where he was displayed like a precious object, a living memorial to a dead woman. The psychological toll of being forced to live as someone else, someone whose death may have been caused by the very man who now claimed to love her, must have been devastating beyond measure. Roman citizens, though accustomed to imperial eccentricity, were deeply disturbed by this particular display. The sight of Sporus, dressed in the regalia of an empress, but bearing the subtle signs of his true nature and surgical mutilation, served as a constant reminder of the depths to which their emperor had fallen. Sporus became a living symbol of power's ability to corrupt not just the soul, but reality itself. The relationship between Nero and Sporus, if it can be called that, was defined by obsession and powerlessness. Nero treated Sporus as both a beloved wife and a cherished possession, showering him with gifts and attention, while simultaneously denying him any agency beyond his role as Papier's replacement. The emperor would address Sporus by his dead wife's name, speak to him as if he were actually the woman he had lost, and expect him to respond in character. This psychological torture, the constant demand to embody someone else's identity while his own was erased, was a cruelty far deeper than physical harm. Nero even took Sporus on tours of Greece, displaying him to foreign dignitaries and Greek aristocrats as his empress. These journeys must have been particularly harrowing, as Sporus was forced to maintain his feminine persona in unfamiliar settings, surrounded by strangers who either believed the charade or were compelled to pretend they did. The constant performance, the inability to ever drop the mask or express his true feelings, created a prison of identity from which there was no escape. The emperor's treatment of Sporus also reflected his own instability. Nero's love for Papier's had been possessive and violent during her lifetime, and his relationship with her replacement carried the same dangerous intensity. He would fly into rages if Sporus failed to perfectly embody the memory of his dead wife, punishing him for failings that existed only in his imagination. Yet he could also be tender, lavishing expensive gifts on Sporus and treating him with the affection he once showed Papier, creating a cycle of abuse and reward that must have been psychologically devastating. As the months passed, the bizarre nature of this arrangement became increasingly apparent to everyone in the imperial household. Servants and courtiers were forced to navigate the complex etiquette of addressing Sporus as an empress while knowing the truth of his situation. They witnessed the daily humiliations, the constant need to maintain a feminine persona, and the toll it took on the young man. Some may have felt pity, others revulsion, but all were complicit in maintaining the elaborate lie that underpinned Nero's fragile emotional stability. The political implications of Nero's actions were not lost on the Roman Senate and aristocracy. His marriage to Sporus was seen as yet another sign of his growing instability and contempt for Roman tradition. While few dared openly criticize him, private conversations revealed the disgust felt by many Romans. The spectacle of their emperor parading a castrated boy as his dead wife was seen as a symbol of the moral decay infecting the highest levels of government. As Nero's reign progressed, political tensions reached a breaking point. His theatrical obsessions, neglect of governance, and increasingly erratic behavior alienated supporters and emboldened enemies. Military commanders began to question their loyalty to a ruler more interested in parading a false empress than governing an empire. The sight of Sporus, draped in imperial regalia, became a symbol of everything wrong with Nero's leadership. By 68 AD, the situation collapsed entirely. The Praetorian Guard, the Senate, and provincial governors declared their opposition, faced with universal rejection and the certainty of a painful death if captured. Nero fled Rome with a small group of loyal supporters, including the young man who had once been a free citizen, then mutilated and transformed into an empress, now found himself bound to a doomed emperor. His survival was tied to the whims of the man who had already destroyed his life. The final days of Nero's reign were chaos. News of rebellion and desertion filled the air. The emperor spoke alternately of escape and of staging a dramatic final performance. Through it all, Sporus remained by his side, still dressed in feminine attire, still playing the role of the devoted empress as the empire crumbled. He must have known that Nero's fall would likely mean his own destruction as well. When Nero finally committed suicide in June 68 AD, reportedly with the help of his secretary Epaphroditus, Sporus was left to face an uncertain future. The emperor's death did not bring freedom. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new and even darker chapter in his nightmare. When Nero fell on his own sword in June of 68 AD, many in Rome breathed a sigh of relief. The mad emperor's reign of excess and cruelty was finally over. Yet for Sporus, the death of the man who had destroyed his life did not bring freedom. Instead, it opened a new and even more uncertain chapter. He was no longer Nero's living empress, but he was still a possession, a symbol of imperial decadence that others would claim for themselves. The immediate aftermath of Nero's death saw Sporus swept into the power struggles that engulfed Rome. The throne was seized by Galba, an austere and aging general who promised to restore order. Among the spoils of Nero's household that came into Galba's possession was Sporus himself. The young man, who had once been mutilated and married for the sake of another man's grief, now became little more than a trophy. His body and his identity were once again stripped of agency, reshaped into whatever role the next ruler desired. Under Galba, Sporus was neither celebrated nor liberated. He lingered in a kind of luxurious captivity, still compelled to maintain aspects of the feminine persona forced upon him, but no longer treated as an empress. This liminal existence, neither fully male nor female, neither slave nor free, neither honored nor discarded, must have been agonizing. He lived as a shadow, a reminder of Nero's excesses and a curiosity for Galba's court. For Sporus, survival meant silence and submission. But Galba's reign was short-lived. By January of 69 AD, just 6 months after Nero's death, Galba was assassinated by rivals in the Praetorian Guard. In the chaos that followed, power passed to Otho, another contender for the purple. For a brief moment, Sporus' existence seemed to improve. Otho, perhaps recognizing the depth of the young man's suffering, treated him with a degree of kindness. It was not freedom, but for the first time in years, Sporus may have felt a measure of gentleness from the man who held power over him. Yet this reprieve was fleeting. Otho's reign lasted only 3 months before he, too, was defeated and forced to take his own life. Once again, Sporus was passed to a new master, a living prize caught in the brutal carousel of Roman politics. He had no voice in these transitions. Like a piece of valuable property, he simply changed hands. His identity reshaped by the expectations of each successive ruler. The next emperor, Vitellius brought Sporus' ordeal to its final and most degrading chapter. Vitellius was a coarse and indulgent man, known more for his appetite than for his statesmanship. To him, Sporus was not a tragic victim, but an opportunity for entertainment. Ancient sources record that Vitellius devised a spectacle for the arena, a grotesque performance, in which Sporus would be forced to play the role of Persephone, the maiden of Greek mythology, who was abducted and violated by the god of the underworld. The plan was as cruel as it was theatrical. Before thousands of jeering spectators, Sporus would be dressed as a maiden and subjected to a staged violation, a public reenactment of myth that would, in reality, be a ritualized humiliation. After years of private degradation at Nero's side, Sporus was now to be degraded before the Roman masses. The arena that had consumed so many lives with blood and spectacle was prepared to consume his identity entirely. For Sporus, this was the breaking point. He had endured mutilation, forced marriage, the loss of his own identity, and years of humiliation. He had been paraded as a wife, passed between emperors, and stripped of every dignity. But the prospect of public violation, of being mocked, abused, and destroyed as entertainment was a cruelty too great to bear. Rather than endure this final degradation, Sporus made a choice. Ancient historians tell us that he took his own life before Vitellius' plan could be carried out. After years of being denied agency, he seized it in his last act. In choosing death, Sporus reclaimed the one thing no emperor could strip from him: the power to decide his own fate. His death was not mourned by the Roman public. To most, he was merely a curiosity of Nero's reign, a reminder of the empire's darkest excesses. For Vitellius, his suicide was little more than an inconvenience, forcing the emperor to abandon his planned spectacle. But for Sporus, it was liberation. In that final moment, he rejected the role forced upon him, refusing to be paraded as an object of ridicule and violation. His end was tragic, but it was also defiant. The story of Sporus is one of the most haunting in Roman history. It forces us to confront the brutal truth of absolute power, a truth not measured in conquests or monuments, but in the private tragedies of those crushed beneath its weight. Sporus' beauty, once a blessing, became his curse. His humanity was stripped away, reshaped to serve the whims of madmen. He lived not as himself, but as the ghost of a dead woman, paraded through marble halls and gilded theaters as a living illusion. Yet within this tragedy lies a glimmer of resilience. Sporus endured humiliation and erasure, but in the end, he refused to be broken completely. His suicide, though devastating, was also an act of defiance, a refusal to let Rome's cruelty script the final scene of his life. He could not control what had been done to him, but he could control how his story ended. In remembering we are reminded that history is not only the tale of emperors and battles, but also of the countless lives bent, broken, or erased by their power. His story reveals the vulnerability of those on society's margins, the freedmen and the powerless, whose fates could be rewritten at a tyrant's whim. And it reveals, too, the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit, the refusal, even in despair, to be wholly erased. Sporus' legacy is not one of triumph, but of haunting testimony. He is a symbol of what happens when unchecked authority transforms human beings into objects, when grief curdles into obsession, and when cruelty masquerades as love. His life was twisted into theater, his identity erased in the service of an emperor's delusion. But in death, Sporus reclaimed his humanity. By choosing the terms of his end, he gave history one final act of resistance against the empire that sought to consume him.